Well, as I said, the hippie life was aided by the fact there was no problem with money. Everyone had money. A couple of years later, everything got expensive, but in those days, we were living in a kind of financial paradise, and there was this tremendous acceptance of all kinds of different people and so on. But after everybody cleared out and left town, I was all alone in this 10-room house. Somehow I'd ended up with this place. And I was walking down the street one day, and there's this beautiful redhead walking side by side with me and flashing these beautiful teeth at me, and she was just exquisite. So I took her home for coffee, and then she took me over to a girlfriend's house. And then she took me home. She had a little studio nearby, and got me down on she had a fleecy rug, a lambskin rug. Oh, yeah. Got me down there and got me to make love to her, and then got me to give her her first yoga lesson. By then, she'd found out that I'd learned yoga at Club Med in Agadir. And you are my yoga teacher. It wasn't like, please teach me yoga, right? Now, I want my lesson now. So all the time I was living this rather fun hippie life, my body was going through these transformations. I was just teaching her. And my first teacher had used the same exact words every lesson, which I thought was a little stupid at the time, but I realized later it made it easy for me to pass it on to her. And she surpassed me. She turned into a person with one body in a million. She was really a natural student, but it was the desire of the student creates the teacher. And I'd get up and look in the mirror every morning and go, whoa, I didn't look like that yesterday. It was like someone was sculpting my body, like it was made of clay or plastic, and every day I looked better. You know, I was a young man still. I was about 31 or 32, but my goodness, I was just changing as if I were being sculpted by Leonardo da Vinci or something like that. Just extraordinary. So we got engaged. I was quite in love with Jeanette and so on. But, you know, she was into spotless dwellings. You know, it didn't fit in too well with the hippie thing, right? I mean, her sister was already married in the apartment. You could have gone through with a microscope and not found a speck of dust. And I noticed when Jeanette took me home to her family in Quebec, there was not 1 inch of the house that had the mark of her dad. It was woman's world, man. You know, like that woman had everything, right? And so that kind of got me a little nervous. But what broke us up finally, she got mad at me one weekend and went and slept with a flight attendant or something while she was on a trip. She was a stewardess, right? So that I couldn't deal with that. So we got unengaged and so on, all right? And but that big love affair had started me being a yoga teacher. And even when she had left, I went on doing. By then I kind of was launched. And then people can see that you know yoga, you know, and so on. And in fact, it was wonderful. On the island, when I got out to John's place, I got the cabin built. And while I was building the cabin, they had a goose, actually a gander called Mr. Goose, and 3 females. And everyone was afraid of him. Because a gander can knock out all your teeth with his arm, you know, with his elbow, if he wants. And he'd bite all the girls in the ass. At night they come out to pee in the yard and he'd bite them in the ass, right? He had everybody terrified. And I don't know if you ever had to deal with a flock of geese, but they get pretty aggressive. They're fearless, right? So everyone was afraid of this guy. But I'd be doing my yoga out on my sleeping bag, climb out of my tent, put out a sleeping bag. I'd get into the lotus position. And when he saw the lotus position, he'd come over. Now, we were all afraid of him, you got to understand. He'd come over and get up on my lap. And then his neck would turn into a big question mark, and all the feathers would stand out from his neck. And he'd start to tressellate. Sitting on my lap. And I'm sitting there terrified that he's going to knock all my teeth out, right? Because he's got his wing right at the level of my teeth. Would you please get off? Would you please get off, Mr. Goose? And finally he'd get off and walk away. But he could not see me in the lotus without coming and sitting on my lap. It's the funniest thing. When he always had his females following him around, 3 white females, and they go, look at Mr. Goose sitting on his lap. It was the funniest scene in the world, right? So we were awful happy out on that island. And then when I got the cabin built, well, I'll tell you one other thing typical. We're going to have at the end of the summer, we're going to have a wedding. And I was in the kitchen, a teapot house, with the bride. And her little belly was already rounded out. She was a couple months pregnant. And she was having a sponge bath in the kitchen, and I was having a peanut butter sandwich, and she was stark naked. And I thought, how many tribes on the earth do you get to see the bride stark naked, right? The night before the wedding. Okay, so that was hippie life, I'll tell you, right? That was one aspect of it. We didn't care. Nobody cared. You could take your clothes off. And there was a real welcoming kind of thing. I think I might have told you this, but on the night of the wedding, someone had been in Vancouver saying, there's a wedding on Lasqueti, and so everyone showed up. We had a 50 extra guests who just come out from Vancouver to see what the hell was happening. And there were 2 heavies sitting on the veranda of the porch of the cabin that I'd rebuilt, and it was now perfectly rebuilt. And one of them, they had chains on and leather and tattoos galore and heavies, right? And I was sitting with them. And I thought, gee, this could be trouble, just a natural reaction. And no one knew who these guys were. And then just then one of the 6 fellows came over out of the house. He came over. He says, hey, where are you guys from? And the big guy says, oh, we just got out of prison. And Dennis says, wow, right? And it's genuine, right? Okay? It's not like, like this, like me. This is the real hippie spirit. Wow, that's going to make it even more fun. And he meant it, right? So that was the hippie spirit, you understand? You could come out of jail, you were welcome. No one, the more the merrier, Everybody was welcome. And then one of the guys was big and one was skinny, Laurel and Hardy kind of couple. And I went to bed finally in the cabin around 1 in the morning. I couldn't take any more. And they were laughing and shouting. And then around 2 in the morning I wake up and I hear this little pipsqueak voice, non-stop. And I realized after a few minutes it was a little guy in leathers, right, who'd been in jail. And I think we kind of pulled the plug, like he hadn't said anything for 3 or 4 years, right? And he got to this place and everyone accepted him, nobody was going to beat on him, and the guy just, and he just said, like he just bubbled like champagne. I'll never forget that. So that was the real sense. It wasn't the costumes and that. People didn't wear costumes, but anyone was welcome. It was just amazing. And when the Darwins didn't have any room for me anymore, oh, I got room for you. Come down the other end of the island. It was like that on Lasqueti. I got a room. We'll find you a room. Come and stay with us. That was the hippie life. So.
And then you decided to leave Lasqueti at one point.
Well, yeah, I fell in love with a girl. That's a long story. I don't know if we'll put that on public view. But anyway, she finally took off and left me with a cat and no more firewood, right?
San Francisco and...
Well, this was how I got to San Francisco when I ran out of firewood on Lasqueti. I had a little family for a while, so I lost my little family. And Lasqueti is beautiful in the summer when there's berries on the bushes, but in the winter you gotta have a good stack of firewood and a lot of books to read. And it's raining all day long, and the roads are all mud this deep. And yeah, it's not as nice. And I said to a girlfriend in Pen Pal in San Francisco, I said, send me the want ads from the San Francisco paper. Maybe I'll get a free ticket for a job interview, which she did, and then I did. And next thing I knew, I was in San Francisco at a job interview. I got a free flight down, round trip ticket. And then, to everyone's astonishment, I got hired by these people. And I didn't even want the job particularly, but they were paying the highest salary for programmers I'd ever seen. It was, I forget what it was in those days dollars, but it was like 100,000 a year basically. We paid the highest salary for programmers in the world, and they had just hired me. Okay, so and I was back in the real world too. I'd been living out on this island, you know, and like a lumberjack and so on. And now I'm back into reality again. And the guy says to me, "I need someone who can code 800 lines a day. Can you do that?" You know. How do I know you're going to work out in this job with all I'm paying you? I said, "You can't know. You're going to have to hire me, aren't you? Find out if I can do the job." I was, you know, that relaxed. So it was 100 hours a week, no pay for overtime. So it worked out to something like minimum wage time plus 10% or something by the time you put in all the hours. It was horrible. It worked day and night. And I actually, my friend out there who'd sent me the newspaper, she found me a girlfriend overnight. I moved in with this girl, had a beautiful house in Berkeley. But I had to commute, you know, into the city from her place, and by the time I get home to her place, it'd be 1 in the morning, she'd be asleep.
What year was this?
71, I guess it was.
1971.
Yeah. And, yeah, 71 in the spring. So by the time I get home, she'd be asleep. So I think I lived with her a couple of weeks, but I think we hardly said a word, you know. She just shared her bed, basically, gave me a place to crash, but she was never awake when I was home, and so on. And it was terrible. We went out, we'd go out to the airport where the computer was and stay the whole weekend out there till we got everything working and done. And at the first employees meeting, if I'd been a doctor, I'd have put 7 out of 10 of those guys in the hospital. I mean, their eyes were not touching their eyelids, and you know, they were staring at the walls. They were worked to death, and I was one of them, you know. So finally, at the end of the month, but I learned one great thing working at RAND teleprocessing. One of my fellow workers said to me, "Make your needs known, Shayne." Very important, right? Make your needs known. That was every time you get a job, you learn a new little principle of life, right? You need something, tell people, and so on. So that was a good lesson there. But finally, one day, Nahum Rand calls me in and he says, "You know," he says, "you're not really shaping up like the others. You're not working hard enough, Shayne." I said, "I put in 100 hours last week. You want to see my time sheet?" He says, "Yeah, but the others are putting in more. You're going to have to work more, or we're going to have to declare this a mismatch." I said, "Mismatch?" So he writes me up my severance pay, and he says, "Where are you going now?" I said, "I'm going to Europe." He said, "What are you going to Europe for? They all come back. Everything you want in Europe is right here. You don't have to go to Europe, right? You've already reached paradise." And I said, "Well, we'll see." And that was the last time I lived in the States for a fair amount of time. And off I went. And I bought a one-way ticket to Europe.
From San Francisco.
Yeah.
Where'd you stop at?
Oh, and I stopped at Chicago where I had family, and I think maybe St. Louis where I had a friend, and then I stopped in Washington, I had a friend there, and Florida, saw my aunt down there, and then I went to Boston, right? So this ticket ate up every penny I had, you see. But by now, I'd become a yogi in the sense my body looked so good people would ask me to teach them yoga. And I'd been saying, until now, I can't teach yoga because I can't do the lotus. I figured if you can't do the lotus, you can't be a yoga teacher. I don't know if that's written down anywhere, but it was written in my head. And about this time, I could do the yoga.
So
I could do the lotus.
You were ready to become a
So I
yoga
thought,
teacher.
yeah, and I have these strange hunches all my life. I kind of always know the future. And I stopped in Canada, my last stop, and a friend put me on the airport and gave me an envelope with $20 in it. Joe Reed, again, my filmmaker friend. He gave me $20 and said, what are you going to do in Europe? And I said, I'm going to be a teacher at the Club Med. And I hadn't even thought of it till then, what I was going to do. But I do remember, before I left Montreal, right when I decided to go out to the West Coast and give up, I took an acid trip. And during the acid trip, I was doing yoga. And I was really enjoying it, and I'd really gotten good by that time. And I thought, this is what I should be doing for a living, you know? This is what I should be doing, is teaching yoga. And then I saw it then. I knew I was going to do it then. And I was in that wonderful posture where you're on your knees and you just keep leaning back further and further with your body like a washboard, right? Until you get down. Feels so good, and it pulls every muscle on the front of your body. Turns you into a powerhouse, you know, wonderful.
But before you went to Europe, you made a stop in Boston, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Picked up a few things.
Oh, okay.